Hello and welcome to Decipher This, a podcast about music and technology from Ensemble Decipher. I'm Eric Lemmon.
I'm Joy Bohigian.
Today we are with Dr. Margaret Schedel, an interdisciplinary artist, composer, and technologist extraordinaire. She is a professor of music and the chair of the art department at Stony Brook University. In addition, she teaches computer music composition at the Peabody Institute and is a mentor to all of us at Ensemble Decipher. Her career blends classical training in cello and composition, audio data research, and computational arts education, and she serves on the board of Seamus and as a regional editor for the Cambridge University Press journal Organized Sound. Her music has been recognized internationally and has garnered her the 2019 Pamela Z Innovation Award, as well as commissions from the Princeton Laptop Orchestra, ICTIS, React, and Yarn Wire. Hi, Meg.
Welcome, Meg.
Hi.
So, sonification is a big part of your artistic practice, and for listeners that are not familiar with this form of data display, sonification is the representation of some sort of data type as sound. So what drew you to sonification, and what are some of the problems specifically with artistic sonification? Obviously, we're talking to a composer here, and not to just someone who's doing data display for kind of practical purposes.
I got interested in sonification because those papers were just sort of around at the conferences that I was going to. And I was like, hey, cool way to do science and music, which is something I've always loved science, but music really has my heart. And so I was like, oh, this would be a really interesting thing to do. I'm already turning numbers into sound in what I do. So why not change scientific numbers into sound? And I also had very strong, bad reactions to most of the sounds of the sonifications that I was hearing. And I thought I could do something more aesthetically pleasing. And so that's been my sort of hill that I'm going to die on, is talking about the aesthetics of sonification. I edited a whole issue of Organized Sound on the aesthetics of sonification, because I think a lot of times people are just like, I changed these numbers into sounds and that's what the sound is. But there's so much choice that goes into it. And I think you need to really listen to the output of your system, rather than just making theremins out of data.
Yeah, so I guess how have you addressed some of these aesthetic problems, at least in your own artistic practice, or if it's kind of directed towards more of this kind of craft-based application where it's about, making the aesthetics represent data in, I don't know, a more pleasing way, or maybe you don't see those two things as separate.
Yeah, for me, the big issue with the sort of theremin model is you're not getting a good representation of the data, and you're not getting a good melody usually. So you're failing on both fronts. And so what I started doing was timbral sonification, and it's a lot harder to explain it in words to people because we don't have as large of a vocabulary to describe the color of sounds if you're not a musician. But everyone really does have an inherent understanding of timbre if they grew up hearing things. And so with just a tiny bit of training, a scientist can start really distinguishing sounds based on timbre instead of pitch. Another thing that I did with the sonification of gait for people with Parkinson's, rather than make sound or quote music out of the data, it wasn't working at all. And I was like, if this is going to be a therapy that somebody's going to want to use every day of their life, I would be so annoyed. And what we did instead was use different kinds of distortion on recorded music. So they could pick the music that they liked, that they were familiar with. And then if there were problems in their gate, it would be reflected by distorting the music. And so the way that you heard the music clearly was to walk correctly as prescribed by your physical therapist. So it's very individualized. So if you can only take steps that are 6 inches, great. That's where your steps will be clear in the music. So that was fun.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. My grandfather had Parkinson's, and I remember hearing about research, I guess, in college when I was doing psychology courses on kind of gait entrainment through sound. But these examples that I read about in the papers were merely just like giving people a pulse to follow along with to help them. But that sounds like that'd be much more helpful for people with Parkinson's in that regard.
Yeah. Reviewer number 2, it's always reviewer number 2, was like, how do you know that this isn't just because there's a beat in this music that they're listening to? And so we actually did someone reading like an audiobook. We had Jane Austen. We would distort Jane Austen and had similar results. So
wow. Oh, that's fascinating.
Reviewer 2.
Yeah, right. So you and I are working on a project together with George Omwat, Litsi Escobar, and Inderjeet Bilku that mobilizes sonification in a COVID-19 mapping and data display tool. Could you share with our listeners a little bit more about this project? Another thing that might be interesting for the listeners to know is how sonification and mapping can help us understand the pandemic.
Yeah, so we are creating a customizable tool to let people understand the lived experience of COVID-19 in Suffolk County. And the idea of adding sonification to a map is to allow the user to have more variables displayed, right? So if you think about the Hopkins map that probably everybody's seen with the big red circles, that's about all the information that you're getting is the number of cases and where, and you can sort of scroll through time. But we wanted to talk about the living conditions of people, like, are they living in multi-generational households? What is the income level? What are the races of people in these particular counties or these hamlets? And we wanted to let people choose which variables they wanted to display visually and which sonically. And the sonifications are going to be a mixture of synthesis and also sort of pre-recorded tracks. So we're trying to figure out, like, can you make several recordings that sort of give you a sense of how many people are living in what kind of size house? So maybe there'll be something with reverb is the size of the house, and then the number of people is somehow like a layer of chatter. And we would actually be able to just turn up the volume on those tracks depending on the data.
Yeah, so I think this can kind of lead us into the next thing that I wanted to ask you about, which is your sound installation Rumline. So can you tell us about the frogs?
Yes!
I heard so much about the frogs. I need to know more about the frogs.
The frogs. Yeah. So I have a certificate in deep listening, which required going to a bunch of retreats with a bunch of people who are also sonically minded and really focusing on listening away from the world, run by Paulina Oliveros, Carol Ione, and Eloise Gold. And I came home to my childhood home after one of these retreats, which is a house on a mountain on 2.5 acres of forest with a stream in New Jersey. And the first day I was home, I was like, oh, I missed the frogs when I was in New Mexico. And then on the second day, I was like, whoa, I can hear that the shape of the pond changed because it rained and the pond got bigger. And I actually heard that the pond was bigger. And I was like, this would be a really cool sound installation to sort of make something where a curator changes the shape of a pond behind like a speaker curtain. And there are these like robot frogs somehow. And so for years, I've just been like, hey, I have this idea. And people will be like, that's such a good idea. I'm like, how do I make robot frogs for really cheap? And then nothing was cheap enough. And then the data machine came out, which is a way of connecting sort of anything with power to MIDI. And I bought one on Kickstarter, and I was like, maybe this will be the impetus I need to get these frogs going. And Brian Smith was getting his doctorate in percussion at the time, and he wanted to incorporate using robotics into his final recital. So I was like, here, learn the data machine, how it works, and then help me with these frogs if you want as payment. And then he roped in Rob Cosgrove to help with the programming. And then when we moved during the pandemic, we moved online. And then Nick Huang got involved by making this thing called Collab Hub, which is a really great tool for not having to know anything about the internet and being able to connect any website to a local machine. So basically, you don't have to know your IP address. It punches through any firewall. It doesn't trigger alarms about firewalls. So we now have a little army of 24 robotic frogs that Brian built. Each one is individual, so they all sound different. They're different sizes, and they use these harvested DVD motors to spin a little plectrum, and then it hits various materials. And on the website, users are able to enter a call that is 5 seconds. So basically from the first hit, we record 5 seconds. Each frog is represented on the website by a button. And then using artificial intelligence, we evolve that call going around the pond by doing some machine learning on the aspects of the rhythm that the person enters. So every evolution of every call is also unique. Oh, and then there's an acousmatic binaural listening as well. We have this fake head, and their name is Ob, and it sits in the center, and you can actually rotate that from the website. So you can turn the head 270 degrees so that's like you're a real person in the middle of that pond. And that is averaging whatever people, right? If there's 5 people trying to control that head, it averages. So there's sort of this individual and collective control over the installation.
Yeah, and that idea of collective control brings up the other part of the installation, which is you talked about the frogs, but there's also this larger theme of climate change and our collective responsibility. So could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so frogs, amphibians in particular, are at huge risk because of climate change, because they live in both the land and the water. So if either one is contaminated, they really get screwed. They also are very, very temperature dependent on sort of reproduction, and each species has its time to like be in the pond and grow and then get out, and then the next one comes up. And so sort of the climate weirding is causing all kinds of problems. And we have actually decided to do a bunch more. So we've started with the frogs. Our next one is going to be bats. And we're just going to keep going, trying to bring attention to sort of the silencing of our natural environment through these installations. So the team works really well together. We think the project is really a good one. And so we're writing grants now to do ultrasonic bats.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have a whole forest of animals.
Yes. Yes. And then at some point we have to do like elephants, and it's going to be like ultrason. What's the other one? Ultrasonic is high. Infrasonic. Yeah. Infrasonic elephants in your gallery.
So these instruments individually are what are, I guess, commonly called NIMEs in our field. So for our listeners, that's a new interface for musical expression. And you often build NIMEs to go along with your musical compositions. So what are some advantages that you see to building a completely new instrument to create music with? Why not just write for the ones we've already got?
Yeah, I mean, I do write music for acoustic instruments, and it's something I enjoy, but sometimes there's an idea that requires something different So yeah, the frogs. So we're calling it an installation sized instrument. Um, and then the piece probably that you're leading into, the After Apple Box.
Yes, so we're going to be playing After Apple Box at New Music for Strings Festival in Denmark. We've done the piece a few years ago when you first wrote it, but could you give us a bit of background on the piece?
Yeah, so coming back to Paulina Oliveros, I was, and my childhood home, this is a little weird. Anyway, I was cleaning out the attic after my dad died, and he had these ammunition boxes, and he was always going to do something with these boxes. And I was like, I am going to take these boxes. And my husband and kid are like, no, you are not going to take these boxes. We have enough coming with us. You don't need more stuff. What are you doing? And I'm like, no. And I was like, if I don't do anything with these in a year, I will get rid of them. But right now, I feel like I need to do something with these boxes. And literally, as I was carrying them down the stairs from the attic, I was like, oh, this is kind of like Pauline's Apple Box orchestra piece where she put contact mics on the Apple boxes, and then people could put their own sounding devices on the crates to make a new instrument. And it like literally came to me all at once. I was like, oh, and then there was a NIME paper where you could actually know where someone was on a stage by triangulating the sound between two mics that were on the stage, two contact mics. And I was like, if I could figure out where on the box you're hitting and have each person fill, quote unquote, the box with sonic memories of their loved ones, this would be a memorial, not only for my father, but also Pauline, who had recently died as well. And so it just came as I was carrying it down the stairs. And this was one of the hardest pieces. I hate when I know exactly what I want because then I actually have to do it. When it's not so clear, it's very easy to like fudge the tech and be like, yes, I'm happy with this. But when you have such a clear idea, it ended up I needed more than two mics because of the surfaces, but I didn't want to have to require a multi-channel device. And so I'm ending up doing sort of a low pass filter on a mic and then soldering two mics into the same channel so that we have stereo. Did a lot with Wackonator and machine learning rather than just like the simpler math that the NIME paper talked about, because the boxes are so inconsistent. So there was that issue, and then really struggling to refine the list of sonic prompts about the loved one who has passed. So it took a long time to get this where I wanted it to be.
Yeah, and we really are like, especially as performers, learning how we're building the instrument, because it's different if you're in a different space, if the box is on a different surface. You have to train it wherever you are to get it to recognize the different spots on the box, which was a really interesting process for us as well. And with the theme of the piece as well, I don't know what it is with this instrumentation, but of all the pieces I've played, the most personal ones, the ones that have required us to be the most vulnerable, have been with this group. Us being able to put something of ourselves into the piece so concretely was something that was really special.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I try to do with every piece, is sort of let the performer have a bit more agency than maybe in other pieces. I think because I was sort of this frustrated composer trapped in a cellist's body, I always try to give more agency to the performers. And so it's not every performer that wants it, but the ones that do are like, yes, finally I have control over my destiny. So yeah, it's definitely something I do. And this one, I think, probably is the most open because I didn't make any of the sounds. So it's sort of lovely to hear the sounds. The ones that really stick with me are the sounds that made people laugh, or an imitation of that person's laugh. Those ones, I just clearly remember those sonic treats.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of invites us as well to think about and remember the people who we've lost, and sometimes we may not have done that yet. I had recorded sounds about my grandmother, and this was not too long after she had died, and I hadn't really processed all of that yet. But going through the process of recording sounds for the piece, I had to go back and really think about all my experiences with her, so it was something that was really good for me, independent of performing the piece just on a personal level.
Yeah, for me too. It was definitely making those sounds about my dad really helped with the grieving process.
Sadly, I've never gotten a chance to perform this, but I did rehearse it before I got the flu, and then we were supposed to go to Seamus, and I couldn't play the piece. And so I also recorded elements about my grandmother when we were in the rehearsal process, and we were training Wekinator for it. But as I was working through the rehearsal process of the piece, I was thinking about like how this piece is. It reminded me of something that was and I'm throwing out a word with lots of baggage here, but it's a post-human work in a way, because it asks the machine to do learning, and it asks us to expose ourselves, and then there's the composer, also sitting there, who's given kind of instructions for the structure and flow of the work. And I thought it's very interesting to me to have a work that kind of exposes how kind of as post-human subjects we're connected in this distributive setting with technologies and people. So still the human is there, but something more as a sum of all of its parts for this kind of very emotional tribute towards the people that we're remembering through the piece.
So I'm big on integrated intelligence. So humans are good at some things, computers are good at other things. Put them together, yay, happiness, good shit. And I've been reading this book on like mushrooms and fungi and lichen. Lichen are both plants and fungi together, and they thought it was just two usually, but it's like fungi and bacteria and a plant and all these things. So I'm gonna I have to figure out how I'm gonna incorporate lichen into my description of myself as a composer, but that's my new inspo is lichen. You heard it here first.
Nice.
Breaking news.
Speaking of lichen, your artistic work and academic research really, I think, deeply engages with environmental justice and political and social justice. We already discussed Rumline for its environmental themes, and you've recently collaborated on a work that two of our members, Rob Cosgrove and Taylor Long, have performed called Housework Lock Her Down, which explicitly gestures towards traditional gender roles by hearkening to the labor that women perform at ironing boards. So these social and political themes have been a common recurring subject for all the composers we have worked with and all the individuals we have spoken with on Decipher This. So I wanted to ask you how you see these politics being channeled through your music and research, and how do you see your music and research then impacting our political world?
Yeah, this was not my idea. This is Jocelyn Ho, and I was sort of brought on as a UX designer and was going to be like one of the first people to compose for the system. So it's interesting that you now like think of me as massively political. Trying to think of any of my other works. I mean, I did something about the 2000 election, but usually I don't think of my works as necessarily being that political. And I'm having a bit of a crisis, right now, thinking, I have project management skills and should I be doing more in the world rather than writing music? So I'm not really answering your question at all.
No, I think that's really interesting too, and thank you for giving the shout out to your collaborator Jocelyn here.
I mean, everything is political, but yeah, but I wouldn't say it's much more of a driver in my personal life, in my teaching life, really in leadership roles, very, very aware of how to get people to participate, who is being left out, how can I give away the power that I do have, how can I help people who need to be helped. I'll sometimes get an invitation for something and I'll be like, I don't need this for my resume, but I do know that somebody else does need this. And I'll be like, are you asking because you want me in particular, or am I fitting a demographic of someone that you need? So very much try to give opportunities to other people.
Do you have anything that's coming up that you would love to let the world know about, Meg?
I need to finish I need to finish this violin / percussion concerto, and one of the members of Ensemble Decipher will be the percussionist. So Taylor will be the percussionist in this piece called Stepped Reckoner, which is it started out as a violin concerto with string orchestra and percussion, and then I just really like percussion. And so the percussion part grew and grew, and now it's kind of a double concerto. And I am doing spectral delay over 5.1 sound system. The string orchestra is symmetrically distributed, and they all have a Kurtali as well. And then I am analyzing the percussion sound to do the spectral delay on the violin. And so some moments will be very, very thin in the electronics. So if the violinist is Kate, if Kate plays a run and Taylor is just simply bowing one Omglocken, only the pitches that are in the Omglocken will be then spread to the speakers. But there's going to be like an accumulator pedal, so it can get thicker and thicker as far as what gets spectrally delayed. And that is the last piece on the album that needs to be recorded. Everything else needs to be sort of edited and mastered. But yes, my first solo CD is coming out with Parma. It's called Signal Through the Flames. And it is terrifying.
Well, we look forward to hearing it, however terrifying it may be.
Yeah, as I was saying at the beginning, I don't like recordings of my pieces because every performance is different, right? I try to make pieces that live in a moment, and then putting them on a recording, I'm like, no, that's not the piece. The piece is so much bigger than that. But I sort of understand the necessity. Otherwise, how will other people find me and let me write stuff for them? But I need to get over that, I think, and just realize that it's an instantiation. But it just seems so definitive. And it seems like that's what defines it. That's a double use of define or definitive. But something about it with the music that I write in particular just makes me deeply unhappy. But buy my CD.
Well, it's one version of the piece, and I'm sure it'll be a great version. So everyone should buy Meg's CD when it comes out.
Yeah, somebody was saying I should make a recording that is 12 versions of the same piece, and I'm like, I actually should. Yeah. Like, honestly, because I don't think different. Like, some performers realize how big the playground I made for them is, and some don't. So hearing somebody else play the piece, hearing somebody play the piece differently, I think would give a more full picture of that playground.
Yeah, definitely. Well, great. Thank you, Meg, for coming on the show. You can find Meg's work at her website, or she's also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and we'll put all those links in.
And SoundCloud.
And SoundCloud. We'll put those links in the episode description.
Yay.
So yeah, great. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks. We would like to express our deepest thanks to Joey Bohigian for doing, as always, all editing and production on Decipher This.